listeners, welcome to Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast, and welcome to episode 52. My name is Tommy, the man on the streets and fellow Loony, and I'll be your guest host this week while the High Priests of Khonshu are communing in Heliopolis, or traversing the Overvoid or Other Void to appease the Lord Khonshu. This week's review is Ed Brubaker's Secret Avengers Volume 1, the whole trade paperback, Mission to Mars. This collects Secret Avengers issues 1 through 5. Now you may be wondering, hey, where's Rey or where's Conrd? Well, best wishes to Rey and his partner Eve this week on the birth of their child. Here's to well-deserved time as a family. We do hope that everything went well, and we can't wait to meet the new Mark or the new baby into the world. I also want to give a big thank you to Jason Burrows for guesting and for Max Bemis' special message on episode 50 just a week or two ago. Now this week, again, as the guest host, I have the special opportunity to kind of take Into the Night in my own direction, and Rey and Khonshu gave me their authority to kind of go wherever we wanted. And issue that I was really looking forward to, really not an issue, but a comic that I was really looking forward to digging into some time ago, really just within the first few months of Into the Night coming around, was Ed Brubaker's and Mike Deodato's Secret Avengers run. So tonight, again, we are going to be looking at Secret Avengers Mission to Mars, which is Volume 1. And tonight, too, we are joined by one of my good friends and really one of the individuals that first got me into Moon Knight, but my buddy Matt. And so, Matt, I would like to welcome you to Into the Night, and welcome.
Glad to be here.
Now, Matt, I know that you are kind of an on and off again Into the Night listener, and I'm glad that you've joined our community.
Mm-hmm.
We are now, I think, our Into the Night Facebook community has just reached over 500 Facebook members, which is really exciting. But Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you, where you come from, and why did I ask you to be on the show tonight?
So hello everyone, I'm Matthew, here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm a practicing attorney. I work for the federal government. I've been in 2 comic books now for about 15 years, with somewhat of a break in between for a while. When I was in college, I didn't have quite as much money, but I've been into it for about 15 years now. So I like to think I have a pretty good knowledge, especially of Marvel, and I may be the one, as Tommy had said, that helped get him into Moon Knight in the first place.
Yeah, right. So Matt and I, we were roommates in college for a number of years. And some of you may recall my origin story with Moon Knight was actually getting together with Matt and another one of our close friends, Alex. And this is maybe the summer after our freshman year of high school, or college rather. And we were playing Ultimate Alliance. And I have a fond memory of all of us playing Ultimate Alliance. And one of us I may have even been me, coming across the Moon Knight character and asking, who the hell is Moon Knight? And we clicked on the Moon Knight character. And you may remember, Matt, that as soon as you click on him, his sound went, Moon Knight.
Moon Knight. Moon Knight. Moon Knight.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember spamming that very well. And I've played that game before with several other groups of my friends, and everyone was always attracted to Moon Knight because people don't know him as well as, the usual heroes, Spider-Man, the X-Men with Wolverine.
Yeah, Wolverine.
But then they see Moon Knight, and he looks awesome. And they're like, who's Moon Knight? This guy, I like his look. I mean, they're drawn to it.
And he throws down, too, because I think in Ultimate Alliance, he's using his bow staff, and, he's got these kind of pretty cool moves. And that was, Ultimate Alliance came out before the Vengeance of the Moon Knight run.
Yeah.
In 2009. Actually, I think Ultimate Alliance came out just 1 or 2 years before that. And Vengeance of the Moon Knight was really where Marvel introduced Moon Knight using guns of a sort, like crescent guns. And actually, we see a bit of that in the Secret Avengers run, given not in this first issue, in the second volume. But it's, Moon Knight in Ultimate Alliance he threw down, he just kind of this like white-clad character. He didn't care who was coming at him. He didn't necessarily have any special powers. He knew what to do. So.
Oh yeah, he was absolutely OP in that game. He could throw down. So he was fun to play with, and he looked awesome. So he was very appealing.
So, before we dig too much into Moon Knight first, Matt, just to, let you set the stage here. Tell us a little bit about how you got into comics. You mentioned that, you've been into comics for about 15 years, so, early 2000s. So that was, about the time that you were going into high school. So, what got you into the world of comics?
So I would say the big thing that first got me into a comic book shop, and I came from a mid-sized city with only one store, and I'm lucky for that because some people are in more rural areas or not quite as big of cities. They don't have anywhere they can really go. They're very limited. So 2002, that's when the first Spider-Man movie came out, I believe, and I was about 14, 15 years old at the time, and after having seen the movie, I was just really, really hyped about Spider-Man, and that's really what kind of drew me in to check out a comic book store. And I remember it was Cashman's Comics. It was not too far away from my parents' house, so I usually would always pass by it, like on the school bus going back and forth. And I went in there one day and started out with a couple back issues, some classic Spider-Man. I remember McFarlane's #1 issue Spider-Man. That was one of the first things I bought when I was just looking through some things in the boxes. And then also there was Ultimate Spider-Man Bendis with Mark Bagley. That had just started around that time. That was also when JMS Straczynski, he was on Amazing Spider-Man, and Spider-Man, he was like the first big entry point for me into reading things on a monthly basis, the regular stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so cool too, because I feel like for many comics readers, it's always Spider-Man, which lends a voice to Stan Lee, the man.
Yeah.
But whether we're talking about readers in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s, like you and me, it really always seemed to be Spider-Man. He's cool, and given this was kind of Bendis' Spider-Man too, but beyond just Spider-Man, because I know that you're a Batman fan too, and I know that you're a big fan of Marvel comics over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
But before we talk any more about those issues, I am curious. I mean, were there any DC comics that really reached your way, or any Image comics? I know that today, and we'll talk a little bit more about the comics that you're reading today in a bit, but when you were in high school or just burgeoning in high school, were there other imprints that you looked into, or were you just digging into the world of Spider-Man?
Well, Spider-Man was the entry point, and I remain a big Marvel fan. There's a lot I like from DC, but some of it just comes down to like time and money with what you can focus on. Growing up, like you said, it's like Spider-Man, he is that Marvel hero that a lot of people get their first taste with, and that's what they're very much into. Batman growing up in the 90s with Batman, the animated series, like how could you not be into Batman after that?
Yeah.
The X-Men cartoon, the Spider-Man cartoon, those were good. I mean, Batman, that's the pinnacle for me. Anything animated on TV, that's like the pinnacle for superhero. But those two series as well. So, once I really got into exploring some more series, this was the time when the Ultimate Universe was really just getting started in Marvel. That was a great jumping on point. So, other than Ultimate Spider-Man, you had Ultimates by, Mark Millar, Brian Hitch, which is like an all-time series to me. Those first 24 issues, Volume 1 and Volume 2, I think those are going to just stand up forever. And I mean, that was an influence, for the Avengers movies today's. Darker, but, they absolutely an influence. Mm-hmm. And, some other Marvel series I was really into at the time, New X-Men by Grant Morrison. Again, one of those all-time runs for me. Daredevil by Brian Michael Bendis. Maybe this is a little underrated. Paul Jenkins, when he was on Peter Parker's Spider-Man for about 25 issues, very, very much in my wheelhouse. And I think maybe, again, one of the more underrated Deadpool runs of all time. Gail Simone on Deadpool/Agent X is what it turned into. Again, I just felt like the time I got into it was just a wonderful time as a Marvel fan. With what you were saying, DC and Image, Batman, The one run I can remember specifically during that time period was the Jeff Loeb, Jim Lee Hush storyline, which
Yeah.
was huge.
That's a classic. That was a classic as soon as it was published.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
but aside from that, Vertigo, I would look at some of the older stuff from the '90s, like Preacher, some of the Hellblazer stuff, Transmetropolitan. Image, not as much really. Now today, quite a bit, but Image has changed a lot in the last 10, 15 years too. So those are the series that really, really got me into my passion for reading and collecting.
So, coming, into high school and, maybe even into our early years in college, in what was that, 2005 or so?
Yep. Yeah.
How did you get into Moon Knight? I know that I have mentioned before on the podcast that, Moon Knight, some people call him Marvel's Batman. Some people say that Batman is DC's Moon Knight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's always that joke going in between. But I know that for sure, as you mentioned, I grew up with Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah.
That was my after-school show, right? That was like the thing that I could count on. I could count on Batman the Animated Series and a snack.
Yep.
And that's what I came home to, and it was always good. It was always great. And Batman the Animated Series went through all of Batman's villains, and that's where I was introduced to Talia al Ghul, and that's where I was introduced to Ra's al Ghul, and
the best rogues gallery of any villain. I don't think you can even argue it.
Yeah, no, and will never be topped.
Yeah.
But then, how did you come into Moon Knight, who, for all intents and purposes, for many people, for the the layman, often see him as the polar opposite of Batman.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a Marvel fan, but also as somebody that came out of Batman the Animated Series, what beyond, say, Ultimate Alliance, as we saw, what drew you to Moon Knight as a character?
So Moon Knight was that character, and you can give me your opinion on this as well. Moon Knight was that cool character who would show up in the mini crossovers or the big crossovers, and you get like a little bit of a taste of him, but I didn't quite know much beyond that. I'm like, Moon Knight looks awesome. Like we were saying with Ultimate Alliance, I'm like, the design is, I think the design for Moon Knight is like top. I love the design of Moon Knight. Just very striking. So like my first taste of him, he would just, pop up here and there, in other comic books. He's kind of placed with the street level heroes a lot of the time, with Daredevil or Luke Cage or Iron Fist or Spider-Man. But he really would show up, anywhere. And Moon Knight, for the longest time, I know he's approaching, 200 issues, but there's been long gaps of time where he had no monthly book. So when you would see him was just in like those crossovers or just like a guest appearance. So that's when I first really, that's where it came from with Moon Knight. It's just like, who is this? And I would love to know more about him. Because every time he shows up, I'm like, this guy's awesome.
Now, do you feel that, like with me, I mean, again, my point of initiation was that shared memory I have with you and Alex and playing that game. Had you noticed Moon Knight before that?
Before Marvel Ultimate Alliance?
Yeah. Like, had you picked him up in comics? Did you notice, like, oh, this guy seems kind of interesting? Or was it really just kind of, in those college years or maybe after, the 2010s, early 2010s that you really started thinking like, yeah, this guy's okay?
Like I said, like my exposure to him was just through like a lot of those crossovers or guessing in other titles. I believe I have a couple of issues. It's Houston, right? Charlie Houston's run. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, Houston. 2006 series.
Yeah.
David Finch on.
And David Finch
artist.
was like, I didn't know too much about the writer, but David Finch was a big draw for me. I believe Finch had done some work on Ultimate X-Men or one of the X-Men titles, and I was very much into his art. So when I saw him on Moon Knight, which again I'm saying is a character like visually very striking to me, I'm like, I got to check this out. And I remember picking up a couple issues and really enjoying it. It was just more around the time where we were in college and funds were a bit tighter and couldn't give it the focus it maybe deserved.
Yeah.
But I actively remember that. I'm like, Moon Knight's a cool character that I'd like to know more about. So yeah.
Now that's something. Let me ask you this, because we're talking probably fall 2006. So 4 or 5 of Charlie Houston's issues had been out by that point.
Mm-hmm.
Houston and Finch.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking. Let's say September, October, December of 2006.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably issue 4, 5, or 6. So we're getting into the second arc of that Houston series, which he was only on for I think the first 13 issues, and then Finch continued. I think Mike Benson continued with issue 14 and went on through the run of 30. But when we were about that age, we were young adults, and we were spending our money in different ways. We didn't have the benefit of digital comics. Now,
yeah.
In my adult years, I've found that I really enjoy having a physical collection. I really enjoy, of course, collecting Moon Knight comics. I have a signed Bill Sienkiewicz issue that I got a few weeks ago that I'm really happy and excited about, that I have that in my collection. I've never really been into digital comics, but our hosts, Ray and Conrd, I know, are proponents of digital collection. So
yeah.
I do want to ask first, Matt, how do you feel about digital comics today? But also, since digital comics tend to be a little bit cheaper, if I'm correct,
yes,
do you feel that if we had access to reliable digital comics on tablets, 13 years ago, would that have been more appealing to you, or do you still think that comics wouldn't have been your thing back then?
I think especially while we were in college and undergrad, had that been a time with iPads that we could have really had that digital access, and I'm sure we had laptops, so we could have looked at it that way as well. I think that would have helped at the time, because the thing is, like, we went to college in a small town. We didn't have any nearby comic book stores, so that certainly would have helped. I'm someone who loves the physical comic books. I love collecting them. If I have the option, I'm always going to pick physical. But
and you like collecting trades too, right? Over the floppies usually.
It depends. It's like now I've really gotten into like the single issues again. I'm kind of like I like the single issues, but then I'm not going to buy the trades if I have them. I will buy like the nice hardcover collected editions, like the omnibus. I love collecting those. I have about 25 to 30 of the Marvel ones right now. Some of the classic runs, some of the great contemporary runs. But yeah, it's mostly like I'll get the single issues if I can, trades if those are hard to track down, and then I may get the hardcover big omnibus edition as well if it's a run I really enjoy, or a nice collection of issues. So with the digital, at least, I think it's great to have that resource, because the fact of the matter is there aren't a lot of comic book stores in medium to small sized towns. So you have to have a resource for people to read them.
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer in supporting your local comic book shop. But for people who really don't have anything close to them, that's pretty much their option. And if someone's going to buy more issues and support the companies and the creators, if they have it accessible to them on an iPad or a laptop, I'm behind that. I would always hope that they can coexist. I would never want it to overtake, though, the physical issues and make that even more niche, than what it kind of is today, because comic books are a niche thing. Even with these billion-dollar movies, the highest selling books aren't going over like 150,000, and there's not many above 100,000. It's a lot of dedicated readers that has kept this alive through the last 25, 30 years, when there was some of that turmoil in the 90s. So I mean, whatever overall helps the industry, I'm behind that. And it looks like right now there is a good balance with it. Have you seen any of the statistics on how many people are reading the majority of their comic books through digital?
Only in brief. I saw a couple articles over the last couple weeks, and I couldn't quote any numbers for you, but I know that it's kind of horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
But we got to give love to our local comic shops. I know that I've spoken many times about Tardy's Collector's Corner in Grand Rapids. Gavin and Deanna and Abby, they do a fantastic job. But Matt, I've never had the opportunity to visit you in Philly, and I know that we've got many Aussie listeners, and we have some European listeners, and we have many American listeners. But I'm from Michigan, and you're from Michigan originally, but you're living in
Yeah.
Philadelphia. So could you give us a little taste of what the comic scene is like in Philadelphia? The city of friendly brotherhood.
So,
Where do you shop? What's it like? Do you
mhm.
have other friends that are into comics? What's your shop like? What can you tell us?
Yeah, I would say Philadelphia has a pretty healthy comic book scene. I can think of 5 stores that all seem to be doing pretty well around different areas of the city. And as far as people that I know who are also readers, I was pleasantly surprised when I came to law school. This would have been 5 years ago now. There were some people in my class of 200 that were also into comic books and actually knew their stuff, and it was a nice little thing I could share with them. And actually, speaking with those guys about it really kind of brought me back into the road of collecting, the monthly issues, not just the trades, because I would say from about 2006 to 2012, I really was just picking up a few things, and that was just strictly by like trade or hardcover. I definitely was not up to date on everything that was going on in Marvel's universe or DC's universe, and meeting these people when I came to Philadelphia really just kind of brought that passion back out again, and has led me on the road of, I'd say right now I think I'm getting about 20 things monthly. How many things are you getting, Tommy, right now on a monthly
Oh, I'm not
basis?
going to say that because my wife might be listening to this. Let's just say, like I said, I'm a little behind on my reading, but I'm enjoying what I'm getting.
Okay. Um, so I was gonna say as well, the store I go to, Brave New Worlds, it's an old city, not too far away. That's where I live as well, in Philadelphia, an old city.
And so
Uh,
Brave New Worlds is the name of your shop.
Brave New Worlds, yes.
Okay, that's a cool name.
Yeah, so it's maybe about 4 blocks east of where Independence Hall is, which could be a frame of reference for certain listeners or people who've been to Philadelphia before. It's a great store. Maybe one of my favorite stores I've been to across the country. It's about a medium size. They have a pretty healthy amount of collectibles that they also have for sale, which I know they have a fair number of people who are attracted in just for the collectibles and not even so much the issues.
Like Pops.
They got a lot of pops. There's got to at least be 1,000 pops in there, but
Yeah.
I
But is that what you mean, like Pops and like toys, or what type of collectibles?
yeah, pops, toys, and they have really really nice like the Kotobukiya, like some of those statues which can range in price. They have the hot toys, which I don't know how much you know about hot toys. Those can be anywhere from $200 to $500 up, like very high quality.
Wow.
Um, Guillermo, my boyfriend, he's not much of a comic book reader, but he is very much a collector, and his primary collecting is Disney. But recently, over the last couple of years, he's really got into some of the collectibles associated with the comic book movies, especially DC stuff. Wonder Woman, he's a huge Wonder Woman fan. Justice League, Superman. So he has a lot of nice collectibles from those movies as well, and he's gotten some of those from the store. He has a very nice baby Groot, like a life-size baby Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 that he got from the store with a nice little jacket on, which I think was about a $200 item, but I think it's one of the best things he has. So they have a lot of great stuff in the store there too. I got a really great Kotobukiya fine art statue of Black Panther. I don't have a lot of statues myself, but it was wonderful. I got it from the store, and yeah, they've got a lot of great stuff to check out. If anyone's ever in the city, it's just worth giving a look to see all the collectibles they have on display. Along,
Now, is that Black Panther statue? Is that modeled after the Black Panther movie, like the MCU Black Panther, or is it a Marvel Knights Black Panther? Or
so this would be based on just the Marvel universe, not the cinematic universe, Marvel comic books. The look I would have to say comes from the Christopher Priest run from the
mm-hmm,
late
mm-hmm.
'90s, early 2000s,
Yeah,
and that started
yeah,
out as a Marvel Knight. It
it
was in the
did.
Marvel Knight imprint for a while. Then it moved over, I think, just to the
Yeah,
normal.
but we
Um,
also had a couple Moon Knight crossover issues with under Christopher Priest. with
Mhm.
Black Panther.
Mhm.
And given those two issues aren't the strongest, but the art is awesome.
I would say
Those were some of the first collectibles that I picked up when I really started getting into Moon Knight. Were those the Black Panther? It's two issues. They have crossing covers too that work together. It's really cool.
Yeah, I want to say that is one of those Moon Knight issues where he was crossing over into another title that I saw and kind of built that interest.
Yeah. I want to say that was 97, 98.
Yeah.
I've got my short boxes here, but so cool. Hey, Brave New Worlds. It sounds really cool. Would you just really quickly, Matt, walk us through? So, like when you walk in the store, what do you see first? Give us the juxtaposition. What does everything look like when you walk in the store?
Well, I mean, when you walk in, so they have their single issues. They have them on the wall to the left. If you were to walk in on the left side, you have a huge wall, probably about like 8 feet tall, that they have their display set up that stretches all the way to the back of the store. That has all the issues from all the companies, and it's assembled mostly alphabetically. So it's this just nice big wall where you get to see everything displayed the moment you get in there. And on the opposite side are a lot of the collectibles. They have some of them in glass cases, and yeah, it's just I can only describe it so well, but it's a very nice setup, very clean store.
Yeah.
The people who are usually in there, Brian and Casey, are very nice and very helpful. And they're very knowledgeable. I mean, yeah, I think you have to be when you're at a comic book store. So it's nice to be able to talk to them about, creators, some of the writers, the artists, what they're enjoying that they're reading right now, what my own thoughts are. Some of the classic runs they enjoyed. So, just a really great store. It's clean, has a lot to offer. Even if you're not much of a comic book fan, it's worth checking out because I think that's one way a lot of these comic book stores are kind of adapting, not that sales are down that much really over the last 10 years, but it's another avenue for them to get some more money is you're offering these collectibles because the thing is maybe the movies that are just making, boatloads of money right now aren't bringing in as many readers as we wish, but it is bringing in interest and people love collectibles and that brings them in the store to buy them and, if that's helping out the stores, I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to, so we'll give some love to Brian and Casey and Brave New Worlds in the show notes, and we'll make sure that we get that posted on the Into the Night Facebook page and Instagram. And so we do hope that if you are in the Philadelphia area, you can visit Brave New Worlds and check out that shop that Matt visits. Now, Matthew, you did mention too that that with a local comic store. Collectibles. Hey, that's one way that we can hook people not only into coming into our store, but maybe even picking up issues.
Yeah.
And one thing that we in the Into the Night community are always trying to do is we're trying to welcome people into Moon Knight. I mean, that's given the name, Into the Night, into the Moon Knight. We want to bring people into this series. We want to bring people into this character. We've been hashtag blessed prayer hands. We had artist Jason Burrows on 2 episodes ago at the big 50th episode. Ray, Conrd, and Rebecca got to interview him, a prolific artist, a contemporary artist. They also got a special message from Max Bemis, the current writer of the Moon Knight series, which was really exciting, not just for the podcast, but for the character too. And so, before we dig into this trade paperback and before we get into, albeit our very little white noise news, I think another way to bring listeners of, say, Moon Knight into the night, not only into Moon Knight, but also into, say, other really great series is to hear what you're reading these days. Because I know that you mentioned before that you've got almost a pull of 20 issues, 20 different titles a month. But, what are some of those issues that you really feel that you're reading right now that are just stellar? What are some issues that are stalwarts that even if they're not that good, you really love? But what are you reading these days?
So I'm getting about 12 things from Marvel right now. And as listeners probably know, there's been quite a bit with relaunches again with Marvel. I mean, that's kind of the cycle of it these days. It's happening every 3 or 4 years, even less than that now.
Every 3 months.
Yeah.
We got Infinity Wars starting in 2 months, and the Warp series, which I want to talk to you about, Arachnite too. So
yeah, I've seen that, which is that's an interesting mashup. But as far as titles go right now, Immortal Hulk is So I love horror as well. So when I see like a nice like horror uh, tint to some of these books, or it's really focused on horror, I'm always going to be attracted to that. So Immortal Hulk is going down that road right now. That's with Al Ewing. I'm not sure who the artist is offhand, but it has been very good for the first 2 issues. Venom with Donny Cates, excellent. His run on Doctor Strange was fantastic. I hate that he was moved off the title. Mark Waid is a great writer, and I've enjoyed his first issues, but I really wish he could have stayed on the title even longer. But the work he's doing on Venom right now is very, very good, worth checking out.
So Donny Cates is on Venom.
Yeah.
He's an
all-star. He's an all-star.
And I know that you mentioned you loved him on Doctor Strange too. But what did you, just very quickly? I have to interrupt you. What did you think about Damnation?
Damnation for the most part was good. I actually, that was featured in the normal title, and then you had the miniseries on the side. The issues in the normal title were much stronger in my opinion.
You mean the Doctor Strange issues?
The Doctor Strange issues, yeah.
The knee breaking and everything.
Yeah.
Or leg breaking, I guess.
Yeah. Overall, I thought it was fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
Not my favorite crossover. What were your thoughts, especially on Moon Knight's depiction and when he was featured?
A lot of the Into the Night members feel like, oh, Moon Knight's being written as Deadpool. This is garbage.
Mm-hmm.
This is such a waste of the character. And honestly, to a certain degree, I have to agree. I didn't really like it. I will say, though, that when I saw Moon Knight pick up Mjolnir,
mm-hmm.
super excited. Like, I just thought that was so cool because when you think, and I don't want to digress too far, but when you think about who Moon Knight is in that instance, and given he was written by a different author off the title, Moon Knight's been thrown around, was Moon Knight acting as Moon Knight? Was Moon Knight acting as Khonshu? Was Moon Knight acting as Mark Spector? Was he acting as Jake Lockley? Was he acting as Stephen Grant? There's a lot of complication there, and maybe someday we can read into that and develop a new series. But so there were moments where I was really, really happy. There were moments where I was like, So.
I mean, I didn't find just the Damnation miniseries issues to be Kate's best work since he started, but his
it didn't throw you off though.
No, the thing is, when an author brings in characters from other titles or characters who aren't even having regular titles, it's always interesting to see the way they're portrayed, because sometimes the characters that are brought in, they put them in a role, they pigeonhole them into this role. It's like, you're going to be my comic relief for these couple of issues, even if that's really, not how you are in your own series or how you've been like depicted recently. But you do have to. The Bemis run has had humor to it, which I am a fan of. But yeah, this Deadpool comparison that you brought up, I find to be quite apt too. It's like, don't use him as Deadpool then. Use Deadpool.
Yeah. Right, exactly. But then at the same time, it's like, well, how much are we going to use Deadpool? The second Deadpool movie's coming out, But that's a good segue. Given I want to keep hearing what you're reading, but ultimately that's a good segue to Secret Avengers, where we have Moon Knight again in one of his first teams, even before Original Sin, which is another series that I'd love ITK to discuss one day. So let's just briefly hear a little bit more about what you're reading.
So also Thor just relaunched, I think, for the 6th time in 2 years. But
who's Thor now?
Yeah.
Is it like a gelatinous blob, or is it actually a human? Is it a woman, a female, a male?
It's back to it's Thor. It's actually Thor. We're back to classic Thor.
It's the Odinson.
Yeah, it's the Odinson.
And he has a golden arm now.
He has a golden arm now. And here's the thing. I have not been reading any Thor before this, and I've been told that Jason Aaron's run, which has been going on for several years now through several different titles, because as we joked, he keeps on getting relaunched. I've heard it's great. I've heard it's great stuff, and I really want to pick it up in the hardcovers. So this was my jumping on point for Thor with Jason Aaron, and I've loved the first 2 issues. I've read some comments online that it seems to be aping Thor Ragnarok a little bit, maybe a little bit more comedy that's been in the title recently, but I love it. And the art, I am in love with the art. Mike Del Mundo, I think it's great. He is the artist. He's doing the the pencils, the ink. I don't know if he's doing the colors, but he's putting in a very significant amount of work on the art, and I think it's great.
Good.
So the other titles, those are the big Marvel titles that I'm enjoying. I'm also getting Avengers, Black Panther, Daredevil, Moon Knight, of course. Then Image, a series I would like to spotlight, especially because it has some relation to Moon Knight, is Gideon Falls by Jeff Lemire.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, just top notch.
Top notch.
Sorrentino, the art, just wonderful. That is one of those series. When I get a new issue of that, it is like right at the top of the pile. I'm reading it the first day I get it. And
speaking to your love of horror too, and mine, that's something we have in common. But it's just it's interesting. It's this murder mystery. It's like everything that we wanted from those criminal, what is it? CSI or whatever, that you find on TV. But I mean, it's like, but Lemire knows how to write. I mean, that guy is a boss. I mean, everybody in the ITK community loves Lemire's run on Moon Knight from several years ago. Mm-hmm. And, Lemire's got a couple other pieces coming out in DC right now. And it's just absolutely.
And he has the Sentry as well, which I have unfortunately not read yet, but I did pick up issue number 1.
Yeah, so we talked about the Sentry issue 1 a few episodes ago, and we had some mixed feelings on that. I really liked it, again, because the Sentry is presented again as this fractured character, which is something that people that love Moon Knight, our loyal loonies that are listening and our new guests, are interested in Moon Knight. He's this guy that we don't quite understand. And that's something that's always turned me away from how to write for Superman. It really does. It's really exciting.
Everything I've ever read from him is just top notch. I just hope he's not getting stretched too thin, because he is on a lot of series right now. He's got Gideon Falls, Descender, Sentry. It's just Black Hammer for Dark Horse, which I've heard good things about but have not read. So. Jeff, don't put too much on your plate. We don't want to see any of the work suffer, because when he is on this stuff, he's one of the best writers, I think, today. He's one of the top writers.
And Gideon Falls too. You find that most of the best writers are Canadian too. I don't know if you noticed that.
Is Rick Remender Canadian? Is he on that list as well? He's one of my favorites right now as well.
But also, Gideon Falls 2 has been. The TV rights have been purchased.
Oh, really?
We talked about that on a few episodes ago. I forget who it is, what the company is, but they're the same group that is working with Guillermo del Toro's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Oh, okay.
And sci-fi series, the Ascent or something like that. I forget what it is. But anyways, the point is that Gideon Falls, in publication, has been out for 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And the rights have already gone to TV. I mean, Lemire is top notch, and we're lucky that we had him on Moon Knight. Mm-hmm. And he said that, I think that if and when the time is right, that he would come back. So that's pretty cool.
That would be very exciting.
In brief though, any other Image comics, any other DC comics that you happen to be reading this week? This month, I guess.
So DC, I am only getting 2 things from DC currently. Month in and month out, and I guess it's not month in and month out, but Doomsday Clock, which I believe is coming out every other month right now.
Yeah. Is it Jeff Johns, right? Jeff Johns.
Yep, Jeff Johns and Gary Frank. Gary Frank, who he's been a great artist for a long time. I think that's why there's the delay, just to give him the extra time he needs on those issues, which is a smart decision, because so far we'll see how it all ties together, but when you're trying to make a sequel to Watchmen, good luck. And you're not
that's the truth.
You're not gonna meet that standard, but if you're close to it and you have an interesting story, then go for it then.
And that's another the thing that I love about comics is that you have, say, Watchmen, you have the true fans, you have the originals that no, Watchmen is done. Watchmen is Watchmen. Don't go on with it. But then you have, I don't know, because honestly, I saw Watchmen first with you. I remember that.
Yeah.
I saw the movie before I read the series.
Yeah.
As it goes, as if you're of a certain age. Same thing with V for Vendetta. I saw V for Vendetta before I read V for Vendetta. And now I've got 3 or 4 copies of it, But it's just, there's some pushback. Some people want this new Watchmen universe to blend into the DC universe. Some don't, and I don't know. But I do find it really exciting. I like the idea that if you're a stalwart, you say here with Watchmen, you want to keep it in its own world, keep it in its own world. But if you want to be adventurous and you want to, I don't know, go into the future here, embrace Doomsday Clock, have some fun with it, and see how it's going to interplay. One thing that I really love about it is got Batman in it, man. Batman.
Yeah.
I mean,
just to see Batman and, well, we're not getting into spoilers, but Rorschach, Rorschach, even, interacting with each other is, it's a treat. And we'll see if they have future interactions. But if you have a good idea and you have high quality creators on the title, do it. Because here's the thing, it's not going to ruin Watchmen. Watchmen will always be Watchmen. You're not going to sully that in my mind. So if you're not a fan of what they're trying to do with it, and Alan Moore is he's a prickly character. He's an interesting man.
He's prickly both physically and figuratively.
And God bless him for it, because,
bless him.
He's made some of the best work, in comic books in the last 30, 40 years. So he is owed a lot, but, he joined the company system. He created those characters in a company system, and that's just how that works. If Jeff Johns was not on it, I don't know if I would have the level of confidence, but so far I've enjoyed what I've read. And the other DC thing I'm reading right now is Deathstroke, which I believe you have that as well, don't you, Tommy? You've been having that in your pull list.
I only the Deathstroke versus Batman,
which is the same for me too.
I didn't start the Deathstroke because I think Deathstroke started a year and a half ago.
It was on issue 30 for a while. It was coming out twice a month. Now I think it's just on a once a month release schedule.
So I've been collecting the Deathstroke versus Batman, which is where Batman finds out that Damian is not actually his son, but Deathstroke is the father, and
sure. We know how that's going to turn out, right?
Everything's going to work out for Batman, and then woe is me, and blah blah blah. I'm getting married to Catwoman, so there's a lot of stuff happening in the DC universe.
I mean, good for Christopher Priest though, because he was a fantastic writer on Black Panther.
Well, he still is. I mean, Christopher Priest is also a legend. I mean, in the Marvel world, pre-Marvel Knights, but getting into that, I mean, Christopher Priest, and again as a leading Black writer too. Yeah. He's one of the glass ceiling breakers there for I mean, given as a man, but as a Black man too. So it's just like awesome.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this, but before he was writing for Marvel too, he was an editor for a long time. He was a very important editor on Spider-Man titles during what I think was their peak. The mid to late 80s to early 90s. Those are some great Spider-Man stories. So he was involved with a lot of great writers and directing stories in some very interesting directions. So he was known as Jim Owsley, I believe. He wasn't using the Christopher Priest pseudonym that he has today, but very, very great editor as well. So,
well, respect to him. Well, hey, I do think it's about time that we bring him back into Moon Knight, and we get into some white noise and a little bit of Over the Moon. But before we do that, we're going to take a little quick break from our discussion with Matthew. And Matthew, thank you for being here. And we're going to hear a quick message from our collective. So we'll see you in a minute.
Hi, this is Phil Parrish from the Capes and Lunatics podcast, a proud member of the collective, and you're listening to Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast.
Hey, welcome back, Loony listeners. Again, this is Tommy, the man on the streets, guest host, while Ray is away with his wife Eve, and Conrd is taking much time in Heliopolis, the overvoid or the other void, communing with Khonshu. We're going to now enter into white noise, the news, and given today is July 16th here in the United States, we don't have that much news as usually goes on ITK. But again, this episode is going to be released about a week after the fact. So maybe some good news has come your way, and I do trust that if you have heard some new news about Moon Knight since then, I hope that while you're listening to this, that the moon is shining bright. So otherwise, I only have two quick points to let you know about. First of all, we know that Ross Marquand, who's of The Walking Dead, an actor, but also the motion capture actor who played Red Skull in Avengers Infinity War, which was a surprise to me. I thought it was my boy from The Matrix. He has showed interest in playing Mark Spector. That's nothing new. It's been around for several weeks, but it's still blowing up on Google News. But also, I do want to give a shout out to 2 points. The subreddit Moon Knight has been popping lately. I feel like there's been a lot more traffic on that subreddit. So if you are a Reddit user, I would challenge you to go to r/Moon Knight, jump on there. There's some interesting discussion. I would, of course, encourage you to jump onto our Into the Night Facebook community. I feel that there's more lively discussion there, but the subreddit Moon Knight has some interesting things happening. But then also Moon Knight Core on Facebook. He or she, I'm not really who that is, but has been doing a really great job posting a lot of fun memes. So I do want to give some big love and big credit to Moon Knight Core. So that's really all the white news we have. Not a lot going on in the Moon Knight world other than the love that we share, the moon that we share all over the world. So at this point, it's time to go over the moon.
The moon will not tolerate your interference.
All right, Loonies, welcome back. Welcome to Over the Moon and our LUNAR-PICK. First things that we're going to do here is with our special guest, Matthew, we are going to do a little bit of a summary of the trade paperback of Ed Brubaker and Mike Deodato Jr.'s Secret Avengers Volume 1, Mission to Mars. So this week's review is of that complete trade paperback, which is one of the first times that ITK has done a full trade rather than just issue by issue. We're pulling a little signal of doom here, so big shout out to Dave and Stu there. But we are chronicling issues 1 through 5 of Secret Avengers. These were released from May through September 2010. They were part of the heroic age of Marvel Comics that followed Civil War, Secret Invasion, the Siege event. This trade paperback in full was written by Ed Brubaker. Issues 1 through 4 were illustrated by Mike Deodato Jr. with Will Conrad on issue 2. Issues 1 through 4 were colored by Rain Barreto. Issue 5 was illustrated by David Aja, Michael Lark, and Stefano Gaudiano. Also colored by José Villarrubia. Letter by Dave Lanphear. Covers by Marko Djurdjevic. Edited by Tom Brevoort. So at this point, Matthew, I'd love if you wouldn't mind taking a little over the moon. Tell us a little bit about this trade paperback. This is issues 1 through 5. Do you think you can handle it? All 5 issues. Can you give us a summary?
I can give you a summary, courtesy of Wikipedia, which had a great summary of this, having read over these now. After the events of Dark Reign and Siege, Norman Osborn was deposed as America's top cop, and his organization Hammer was disbanded. In response to his hand in reforming the original Avengers and staving off the siege of Asgard, the president appointed former Captain America Steve Rogers as America's new foremost law enforcement agent, as well as dissolving the Superhuman Registration Act at Rogers' request. Captain Rogers then forms the Secret Avengers as a group of superheroes to operate under a veil of secrecy, in addition to the main Avengers team. The opening issues show the team being proactive about known threats and cleaning them up, Black Ops style. They are in direct opposition to a group called the Shadow Council, seemingly led by Nick Fury. In one such plot, they find a dangerous artifact, the Tentacle Crown. After some research, the group finds a link to the Roxxon Corporation, which leads to investigations of a mining site on Mars. Richard Rider is on the case, and in his investigations, he finds another crown, the Serpent Crown. The crown possesses Nova, but he is pursued by a guardian of the crown, claiming to be a construct named the Archon, who was created by the Watchers. The possessed Nova directs Shadow Council agents into unearthing a primordial evil. Steve Rogers, with the help of the Xandarian World Mind, temporarily gains the Nova Force to take out the Serpent Crown Nova.
Yes, the Serpent Crown slash Nova.
Slash Nova.
Slash Nova.
Won't say the slash then. Yeah.
That's
Nova
right.
possessed by the Serpent Crown, yes. Yeah.
Exactly. Wikipedia, thank you. We honor you with all of our moon blessings, always and forever. And Matthew, I also have to thank you for pronouncing Archon as Archon, because that's how I, as I read this, pronounced it. And it just excites me when people pronounce things the same way that I do, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this before we started recording, but I forgot, so I'm glad we're on the same page. I was hopeful.
Well, yeah, because I do find in comics that, that depending, I really do think on your dialect, where you are within your own nation, but also where you're in your vernacular, but also where you are within the world. If, let's say, we have a comic that is printed in English originally, written in English originally, and printed in English originally, and then it's sent to generally English-speaking countries. It really is interesting how people pronounce things in different ways. And something that's super special about the ITK community is that this is a podcast that was started in Australia by Rey and Conrd, and they welcomed in Rebecca first from England, from the UK, and then they've brought in some American listeners, and I know that we have listeners from all over the world. And so, for as much as I say that I'm excited that I love that you pronounce it the same way, that's not to say that I absolutely love how this community is wholly international. It's really exciting. So
so Archon is the Midwest white boys pronunciation. So
the lackadaisical, no class. We have no hipster to us. We're just a bunch of bumpkins here. So that's the Archon. Yeah. It's just nice to have somebody from home, right? That's what I mean.
We're grouped together.
Yeah, there we go. So really, up front, this is looking at a trade paperback. This is a whole 5 issues, released about 2010, 2011. Written by Ed Brubaker, again, a well-known comics writer, especially within the Marvel community. Also, Mike Deodato Jr., he also appeared on Original Sin several years later, which again is something that Rey and Connor Shu, I'd love for ITK to look into, because I love Original Sin. That was one of the most important series that really confirmed my collecting of Moon Knight. Something interesting though that I, looking into, that I didn't know this before, but looking into the cover notes on my issue of Volume 1, Mission to Mars, but also doing some research, Mike Deodato Jr. is actually a Brazilian artist, Deodato Taumaturgo Borges Filho, who he's a Brazilian artist. But as he's working for Marvel and working for other companies and imprints, he goes by Mike Deodato. So I think that that's a really interesting discussion, which I don't think we're going to get into here. But again, I just, I respect him. I think he did a great job generally with the art, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. Another note, too, that Mike Deodato Jr., or if we go by his Brazilian name, he also illustrated issue 20 of Moon Knight Volume 3, written by Mike Benson. So this was the last 10 or 11 issues of the arc that we know that was originally started by Charlie Huston in 2006. So those of you that are fans of the Charlie Huston, David Finch run, we have seen Mike Deodato's art before, but we have him in full on these first 5 issues with a few guest appearances from a few other artists. So Matthew, I do thank you for that summary. I just want to turn it over to you at first. I mean, before we go into general aspects about this issue, is there anything you want to say generally about the genre of this issue, or anything that, before we go into the detail about, say, Moon Knight, or, his interactions with any of these characters, is there anything that jumped out to you about the genre of this issue that was different than other comics that you have been reading or that you've read before?
So I mean, it fits into, that covert spy, you know, underground assembly of heroes, which has been done plenty of times, but not like anything I've been reading lately. So it's a nice throwback, and this is something I've never read before. So this is my first time with these issues, and you know, Brubaker. I'm a big fan of Brubaker. He's done phenomenal work for Marvel, and then his creator-owned you know, series with Image. Something that really stands out to me, which I think has been getting better lately in a lot of the titles I've been reading, but I will say I think was an issue for a while, is just the pacing. And let me say, I think the pacing between these 5 issues, and especially 1 through 4, is really great. I think for a while there were some issues with writers who didn't have that control of like pacing with the action and the dialogue, and just going too heavy in one or the other. I think it's great work he did on this. It was very easy to read. It kept me engaged the entire time, and even these writers who are great with dialogue and have great ideas, sometimes they're not presenting in the best way. And there was a nice interplay between him and Deodato with the art. I think he was a good fit for this as well. That's my general impression at first.
Yeah. So generally, too, just to, you know, for any Loony listeners that are out there that haven't read this yet, and we won't give too much away. I mean, obviously, we're going to do a fairly complete review, but we won't give some of the finer details away. This is very much an espionage. This is like a spy thriller.
Yeah.
You know, which I think is so cool, because we know as ITK listeners, and we know as Moon Knight fans, that, you know, Moon Knight is a loner. He has an investigative aspect. He has that kind of night hunter aspect. He has that, you know, a little bit with the original Hulk appearances that he had in the late 70s and then into the 80s with his first run with Doug Mensch under Bill Sienkiewicz on the art. He, you know, and a little bit of horror. And we don't really, I don't think we'd get too much horror here, but it's really interesting how Moon Knight is brought in, again, under Steve Rogers here, Captain America.
Yeah.
The Secret Avengers are like a secret spy team. And I thought that was really cool. And I'd love to see Moon Knight used in that realm again. I really like the idea of the spy action. So, you know, Matthew, you mentioned a little bit about how Brubaker and Deodato worked really well, just the writing and also the art. Mm-hmm. And so I guess maybe before we get too much into the narrative and we get too much into that, you know, espionage thriller aspect, let's talk a little bit more about the art. So whether it be the covers or any special scenes, you know, given issue 5 is a little bit different, which I think we should highlight in a few minutes.
Yeah.
But maybe within the first 4 issues, is, you know, anything special about the art that you noticed, especially regarding Moon Knight?
So with Deodato, he's always had a very excellent command of the use of like inks and shadows in his work, which I think really fits well with what we're saying with like this espionage, spy thriller. You've got heroes in the shadows. It's just a really good artist for him to be paired with for this type of story.
And you really see that, honestly, within the first couple pages of issue 1.
Yeah.
With Valkyrie and Black Widow. Mm-hmm. The silhouettes, the shadows, the mystery, I mean, the sex that's in the air, too. You know, you have to notice that.
There is a great... I'm looking at it right now. I love the way when they introduce Moon Knight and Steve Rogers approaching him about joining the Secret Avengers.
That's a flashback.
It's a flashback, yeah, in the story. It says 2 weeks ago from where the issue originally starts. And if you get the chance to look at this again, with the inks, it's them, a silhouette on the edge of a building with the cape blowing past him in the wind. And it's a really great image.
Yeah, Moon Knight's cape.
Yeah, it's a really great image. And you can see the Moon Knight emblem. You can see the Steve Rogers Captain America emblem, which is a little bit different because he's not quite operating as Captain America during the series, but that's a good example of his use of like shadows and silhouette. There's a couple other good examples throughout this, but
Well, yeah, and just to speak to that image, that we have a really cool splash page here, honestly, because there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 proper panels, and the fourth panel, this is, I wish I could tell everybody, maybe 10 pages in or so. In these, I have a hardcover of this trade paperback, so it's a little bit, the pages are a little bit different, but Ant-Man and Moon Knight are working together. Ant-Man has a single image. Ant-Man is using his Pym particles. Moon Knight's in the silhouette. And then you have this just badass a close-up of Moon Knight's cowl and his face mask and these glowing blue eyes.
Yep.
But then that fades into this flashback where it says 2 weeks ago with the Avengers symbol.
Love
and as Matthew was talking about, you see this dark profile of an apartment building, a fire escape, these New York City water towers for water pressure, the city in the background. And Moon Knight's cape is blowing into the wind, but it's blowing away from Captain America. And that's what I love. Yeah. And Moon Knight's posture, he's strong, his chest is out, and he's saying, teams and me, we don't work.
Exactly.
Too many voices.
Yep.
And then, Steve Rogers is standing stout behind him, but Moon Knight's cape is blowing the other way. And I just love that. I love the idea that maybe there is this continuity. Maybe there is this idea that Moon Knight, even though he's going to agree to go into this mission, or he's going to agree to this team for 21 issues or whatever, he's always blowing in the other direction because Khonshu is always pulling him. Vengeance is always pulling him. Some other thing is always pulling him. So, Matt, I'm really glad that you pulled that page. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean,
and the shadows there. It's just great.
It's a great example of the art is not just communicating action or someone standing somewhere, but like you said, the way they're laid out in that panel and the silhouette, it communicates a lot about who they both are. Him approaching him, Steve Rogers from behind, Moon Knight with his back turned, looking out into the city. Those are great details, and the art really expresses, those character traits for you to let you know this is who this person is, just based on it. It's wonderful. It's great.
Yeah. Because, we get so much of Steve Rogers and Iron Man. I know that, within the modern era, the contemporary era, we see that in the movies. Yeah. And we're seeing a lot of that in the comics. And we've seen a lot of that in the comics for the last 30 years, I'm sure. But I like the idea that Moon Knight is Steve Rogers' greatest challenge. And again, it's probably not true, but just I think
he's
Moon
the
Knight
greatest
is
challenge of issue 1.
Yeah, well, yeah. He's like Moon Knight, honestly, is the greatest challenge for everybody, including himself. But just this idea that I don't know. There's something always interesting, something always mysterious about Moon Knight. Like Steve Rogers, we know who he is. Tony Stark, we know who he is.
Yeah.
But Moon Knight, even with Max Bemis's recent introduction of explicating the Khonshu aspects and trying to understand how gods work and this and that, we still don't know who he is. And that's something that I feel like is so precious about that character within the Marvel Universe. So
yeah, there's still so much to go with him. And this may be a little bit too much of an aside, but Ant-Man and Moon Knight together, I would love to see them have a team up, whether that be in the regular series or a mini series, because the back and forth in their scene, it was great.
Yeah, and Ant-Man and Moon Knight do have a few really great scenes here, but this is not the Ant-Man that most people know. This is not Hank Pym, nor is it Scott Lang. Mm-hmm. This is actually Eric O'Grady, who was a former member of the Thunderbolts during the Hammer routine, just previous to the Heroic Age. And so, I don't know too much about Eric O'Grady. Matt, do you know much about him?
I don't either. It's like when I saw this, I'm like, oh, we're dealing with Scott Lang here. And then I'm like, oh, so he's coming from, you said it was Thunderbolts, right? Or was he just affiliated with Hammer?
No, so Eric O'Grady was, I think it's the Siege event.
Okay.
And Secret Invasion, where Norman Osborn basically takes over S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah.
And then he forms the Thunderbolts, which is a series that has continued. But the Thunderbolts originally started as basically like the evil people's version of the Avengers to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
But then basically Eric O'Grady is redeeming himself. So there's a lot of Scott Lang in him, in the sense that, like, oh, I'm this guy that has to redeem myself. I have to use these powers to make good. But Eric O'Grady, and I, as far as I know, at least in recent years, I haven't seen him present as Ant-Man.
Yeah.
I don't know too much about him. Really, the only Eric Grady I've read is in the Secret Avengers run, which I've enjoyed. So yeah, that's about all I know about him.
Yeah, I mean, if this were Scott Lang, if we just did everything the same way and just said he was Scott Lang, I feel like he'd be portrayed the same way with the humor and everything. But it definitely made me interested to like look into, you know, what has he done that he needs this redemption, and Steve Rogers thinks enough of him to have him come onto this team, and he is a key member of the team. So, yeah.
But also witty enough to keep up with Mark Spector and Moon Knight. You know, given that Moon Knight is written a little bit differently here, because, you know, we get a little bit of the vengeance of the Moon Knight from the 2009 run. This is, I think, I'm pretty sure that the Secret Avengers run preceded Bendis. Yeah, it definitely preceded Bendis' run, because I think Bendis started in 2011 with Moon Knight. But this is, you know, Moon Knight's the one that's always tossed around. So
yeah.
So hey, you know, we were talking about just shadows and Mike Deodato's art and how it worked really well. Any other special scenes that you want to comment on regarding Mike Deodato's art? His work with shadows. I mean, specifically related to Moon Knight, given that we have some limited runs here in the first 4 issues.
You know, some of Deodato's splash pages are very impressive. You know, after the first issue, I could review these again, but Moon Knight's his next big appearance is when he's paired with Black Widow and Valkyrie, when Nova, who's been possessed, is running amok on Mars, and we get to see a little action there. So I like the way he was portrayed again. He is a good fit for drawing Moon Knight. You know, the darkness, the shadows, it works great. And throughout, you know, these issues, I think he does a great way of portraying him artistically. So
yeah, I would absolutely agree. And you know, the cool thing is, I love the idea of Moon Knight being on a spy team and being on a spy space team. You know, I think this is so cool.
We're going to Mars, guys. We're going to Mars on a spy mission.
We get that again in Original Sin, where he's paired with Bucky Barnes. You know, if any listeners out there haven't checked out the Original Sin run, absolutely check it out. I mean, Moon Knight is underutilized in that run, but I love that. I think it's a lot of fun. I think the art's really interesting. But I would completely agree that Mike Deodato's style here, which, you know, the lines are so clear cut, but then these shadows and the gradients are so deep. I think that I would absolutely agree that really comes in with Moon Knight. There's this great splash page. I'm trying to find the issue, so I think it's issue 2. Again, we're in the paperbacks here, but it's issue 2. Steve Rogers and Moon Knight are fighting. Moon Knight has given Steve Rogers some information about what has been happening within this Martian base, and they start getting into this fight with these, these Shadow Council soldiers.
Yeah.
And there's 2 great panels of Moon Knight. The first is this great that spans across 2 pages, and Steve Rogers and Moon Knight are fighting, and Moon Knight is doing really like a kung fu move.
Yeah,
I mean,
karate
he's all
kick
up in the air.
Yeah.
But, you know, he's out of his spacesuit. He doesn't have his cowl on, but he has this face mask and this like fitted bodysuit, and it's just I don't know, that adds a dimension to Moon Knight that I think is really interesting. And then there's this great smash out panel that's offset on a weird angle. where Moon Knight simply says "agreed" down in the lower, and then if you take a look at that onomatopoeia,
don't you love that
there,
sound effect too? Bzats.
Yeah, bzats. The onomatopoeia there. It's bzats. Like I don't know. Like how does a punch make that sound? I don't know.
It's on Mars. There's different rules.
Exactly, though, right? And that's the thing that I love about Moon Knight is that he shouldn't have rules. I mean, if you take like the Jeff Lemire run, that was an entire series based upon rules that nobody understood. And, were we real? Were we not real? Were we actually in an asylum, or were we in a mental hospital, or were we in Mark's mind? Was he making up the rules? Was somebody else making up the rules? Was the universe making up the rules? Were the gods making up the rules? We didn't know what was going on. It was kind of like Hamlet, just everything is up in the air. But here, I love the idea that whenever you're using Moon Knight, just make it look cool.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to look cool.
It's
fun.
It's fun.
I love that.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. All right, so we talked a little bit about art, and why don't we touch a little bit about, and we spoke a little bit about the espionage action, but how about the idea of Moon Knight being on a team? So I think both of us came into Moon Knight where he was a solo character.
Yeah.
And we've had various experiences seeing Moon Knight on a team. Obviously, with Damnation, we spoke about that a little bit earlier, where he was on a team, and we mentioned that. But what did you think? Your understanding of Mark Spector, Jake Lockley, Stephen Grant, Moon Knight, the Khonshu aspect, seeing Moon Knight here, where Khonshu is not a thing, where Jake Lockley is not a thing, where Stephen Grant is not a thing. It's just Moon Knight. Mark Spector is not a thing. It's just Moon Knight.
Yeah.
Right. I have a couple questions. First, do you feel he ever has a place on a team? 2, do you feel that you saw any of his other identities in this character, or was it just a flat Moon Knight written by Ed Brubaker? But I think also, do you think he should have been on this team, or should somebody else that would have it's Moon Knight? He's a street level character, for most readers. Why was he on this intergalactic? Well, I guess not intergalactic, but why was he on this interplanetary team? So, what are your thoughts about that? Why was Moon Knight here?
Why was Moon Knight here? Well, he looks cool, number one. But I mean, let's think again about when Steve Rogers approaches him. He's like, I need you as a part of this team. You may not be seeking it out, but I know you have value to us. I know you have certain skills. I know you have that bravery. I've seen you in action before. You could be an asset here, especially because a lot of Moon Knight is about, as we said, harnessing the shadows, the secrecy, sneaking. He's a fit for espionage, for not being detected. When we were talking about him and Ant-Man, when they're first introduced in their action scene, the first time we see Moon Knight is coming down from the ceiling. His legs are up there, and he's just grabbing that security guard's neck and whipping him up, which is a very fun visual to introduce him for the first time.
Really, too. And if we could just digress for a second, that is totally badass. I seldom do we see that, honestly. Honestly, the first time that you see Moon Knight, as Matthew's talking about here, if you happen to have the trade paperback or the issue, this is the first issue of Secret Avengers, Ed Brubaker, Mike Deodato. Let's see, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7. Did I skip over one?
Roxxon Corporate Headquarters, Wilmington, Delaware, and those poor security guards just going through the building.
It's like page 10, but Moon Knight is coming down from an AV vent or something like that.
And the cape coming down too.
It's more like the cape, his cowl and his cape is enveloping the guard more than Moon Knight himself.
Yeah.
And Eric O'Grady's Ant-Man is there, but for sure, it's just so cool. And again, we already talked about the next page where the way that Deodato drew Moon Knight's cowl, it's so menacing. It has that bird beak. It has that Khonshu beak that was adapted after Vengeance of the Moon Knight. It's just this pointed cowl, and it's just hanging over with these blue eyes. So for sure. I interrupted you, but it's
Yeah,
a really cool few scenes.
Yeah, I mean, just a very, very cool intro. I'm sure that came from Brubaker's writing. I'd be interested to see like what direction he gave Deodato as the artist for how to portray that, but if it was one or both or whatever, it was a very fun intro for him. I believe one of the other questions you asked was the portrayal of Moon Knight, and clearly you know more about Moon Knight than I do. I'm learning in a lot of ways still, but he seemed more to just be Moon Knight, not Mark Spector, Jake Lockley, any of the other personalities. It was just him. I don't want to call it a flat Moon Knight because I don't think he wasn't presented in a flat way, but it just seems like this is Moon Knight. I don't think we ever see his face in these 4 issues. I can't recall that. Do we ever see him unmasked? I don't think so.
No, and that's the same thing that we see with Damnation too, with Kate's Damnation. Is the idea that we're using this character Moon Knight. We're not using the character of Moon Knight in the sense that he is Mark Spector, he is Jake Lockley, he is Stephen Grant. And perhaps now with the Max Bemis run, he is now Khonshu, right?
Yeah.
He's just Moon Knight. He's just this flat character.
Do you think these writers ever think it's like, all right, I'm going to keep him in the costume the entire time, because the moment I take the mask out of him, I've got to give him a little more depth, but if I can just keep him in the costume, I can just use those aspects I want that serve my story, which is fine, but it's like by leaving him in a costume, he's not quite as, as developed as a character.
Isn't that's the interesting thing about Moon Knight? He's less mysterious with a mask on, right? So most people and most heroes or most villains are more mysterious when they have their mask on. But the thing about Moon Knight is that he's more mysterious when he has his mask on because you don't know who he is. So or who he could be, I guess that's the better way to put it.
Yeah, it's like what personality is in control right now.
Yeah. So, to your question, I think that the writer here, Ed Brubaker, he must have done some research. He must have some knowledge. And, to the editor's credit, they must have put some work forward. But I think that you're absolutely right in the sense that in this story, much as in Original Sin, which again, Loony listeners, check that out. Personal favorite, love Original Sin. But again, Moon Knight is used in a flat way. He's a single character. We love our character of Moon Knight because in an individual comic issue, he can be 4, perhaps even 5 different people or different things. But when he is used, say, in an Avengers, Secret Avengers here, or when he's used in Original Sin, or when he's used in these collective issues, if you go way back to West Coast Avengers from the 80s, he's just Moon Knight. And you might see some strange aspects about him, but at the same time, he's just this guy that has this white hood and this white mask. So I think that within Secret Avengers, honestly, for most of the run, not to ruin Secret Avengers Volume 2 and Volume 3, the former by Ed Brubaker and Mike Deodato, the latter by Warren Ellis with several different artists: McKelvey, Walker, Aha, Lark, Malieve, Immonen. I think that at least within this first volume, Moon Knight he's Moon Knight. That's it. There's no depth to his character except the fact that we know that at the beginning, as Matthew, you introduced him several minutes ago, when Steve Rogers asks him to come onto the team and his cape is blowing into the wind, we know that he's mysterious. We know that he has perhaps killed people. We know that he's damaged people. We know that he's trying to change his ways. All we know is that he's a good fighter. All that we know is he's good at getting in and out pretty quick. So I think that it's a little unfortunate that Brubaker doesn't make use of the multiple personalities, but I still love the fact that Moon Knight is getting some spotlight within the trade. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and has, some nice highlights in these issues, really. You know,
Mhm.
he's one of the standout characters from the first issue, especially.
Yeah, I'd say in the first issue, and before we started recording though, Matt, you and I were talking about, oh, is it at the top of issue 3? Is that it?
Yeah, I
So
believe third one.
the of Secret Avengers have arrived on Mars. Where is it that? Yeah, I think it's at the top of issue 3, because at the end of issue 2 of Secret Avengers Volume 1 here, Moon Knight is sent on a side mission with Black Widow and Valkyrie. Again, they're on the surface of Mars trying to find out Nova, Richard Rider, who is now under the control of the Serpent Crown. But then at the beginning, the very beginning of, well, not the very beginning of issue 3, because we learned a little bit about Aloysius, what's his name? Aloysius Thorndrake. Aloysius Thorndrake, who we learn becomes like the eternal leader of the Shadow Council. But we
former member of the Confederacy, of course.
Yeah, of course. Right. But if you go to like let's see, what is this? This is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th page of issue 3 of Secret Avengers Volume 1. Valkyrie is just throwing down. She's going all out. Again, we are on the surface of Mars. She's throwing down against Shadow Council members. She's talking to Steve Rogers through some comm link. And then Steve Rogers says, "On your own? What happened to Black Widow and Moon Knight?" And then Valkyrie simply says, "They fell. Quickly. This Nova has much power. More than he should." And then in the background, you see Black Widow and Nova and Moon Knight just sprawled out like they are dehydrated. It's like they've been to like Lollapalooza and haven't had any water for 3 days.
They're strung out. They're looking pretty rough there.
Yeah, there's no hope for them. Which at the same time, hey, Valkyrie is straight out of Asgard. Moon Knight might be of the god Khonshu, we don't really know, and Black Widow might be a super spy, but they're both still human, and they're on the surface of Mars.
They have power limitations compared to some of the heavy hitters.
Which I actually really appreciated that. I like this idea that, hey, we have these two regular humans that are badass in every other way, but wait a minute, you're on the surface of Mars and you just got your butt kicked, you know? So.
Yeah, I mean, I like that too. You know, sometimes there's just too much inconsistency with like power levels and what people are capable against other certain, you know, antagonists, villains. I love what they did with that. It's like they fell quickly. This is Nova, and we have Valkyrie of Asgard. It's like these are the heavy hitters right now. It's like, if you guys weren't able to get out of the way, you were going to be, you know, taken care of very quickly, as they were.
Yeah, and honestly, and we could talk more about the trade, and we can talk more about the first 4 issues, and you know, given issue 5 is very much a departure. It's more of almost like a flashback where Steve Rogers learns a little bit more about Nick and perhaps the secret clone, which again, as I think we can jump into this. Matthew, you and I, before we started recording, we talked a little bit about how you had never read this Secret Avengers Mission to Mars before. You had really never read the Secret Avengers series before that started in 2010, 2011. So
yeah, no, this was the first time, and this would have been during a period where I wasn't doing much reading, especially of Marvel. It's like I was just keeping up with some trades and hardcovers from other things. So yeah, I had not read this before.
Yeah. So as we kind of broach into some ratings here, you know, of what you thought and what you liked, I think any final comments about, you know, did this encourage you to continue reading? You know, what you thought generally about the use of Moon Knight? Do you think that you'd be interested to see how Moon Knight is continued to be used by Brubaker in the future, and then Warren Ellis in the 3rd volume of this? So as we come into our moon ratings, we are now moving as an ITK community, moving into giving new moons for just absolute garbage, quarter moons, half moons, 3/4 moons. That's where we're starting to get into that, you know, 4 out of 5 rating, formerly the 4 crescent darts out of 5 crescent darts. and then of course the full moon, and then the blue moon for just an absolutely excellent issue, or in this case a trade paperback. So Matthew, what I'd love for you to do is give me a rating, using the moon schedule here, but also give me some comments. Why was it? Do you feel that this trade would continue your reading? I know that you bought the omnibus, but generally tied to Moon Knight and the use of Moon Knight, how would you rate this trade?
So I'm gonna give this 3 out of 4 moons, 3/4 moons, 3/4 moon.
So 3/4 moon, so that's like a 4 out of 5 crescent darts.
Yeah, that's
so
that's
4
the
out of 5.
equivalency
Right.
we'll go with. I'm kind of rating this in 2 ways, like the story itself and then Moon Knight's place in it. Because really his big feature is in that first issue, and then he has the nice the fight with Steve on Mars, which you're right, it has an excellent splash page. He has some fun dialogue. Really love the way he's illustrated, and he doesn't have the cowl on. It's kind of like more tactical for the circumstances. I'm gonna go with 3/4 of moon for this. The story itself, a full moon. Can I do a split? It's like 3/4 of a moon for Moon Knight, but if I'm just judging it entirely by itself, it's a full moon. Is that allowed?
Really, like a full score. You love this. You love the story.
I thought it was very fun, and like I was saying, the pacing is great. There's something to be said, especially because I had not read this before, and only knowing so much about where these characters were at this point in time, and I was still up with everything, and the way he presented them had just enough depth that I could get the motivations of everyone and had a good idea of like where they were at, but I didn't have to deal with being bogged down by a lot of side material or exposition. It's like there's nice pacing to this. This is a fun spy espionage thriller. We're going to Mars. It's like, how could that not be fun? And he keeps it fun.
For sure.
The action's
For
great.
sure.
So it's a full moon. It's a full moon for the story, for Moon Knight and his involvement, and some great splash pages, some great art, some really fun lines, especially when he's with Ant-Man. I'm gonna give 3/4 of a moon.
Yeah, that Eric O'Grady, but soon turned to Scott Lang.
Yeah.
Soon turned to Paul Rudd. Honestly, I feel a lot of Paul Rudd's Ant-Man. I feel a lot of that in this Eric O'Grady character. And as we mentioned, neither of us are really familiar with that version. But given Scott Lang has been in comics for a while, but I really feel that maybe Paul Rudd pulled a little bit from Eric O'Grady, maybe from this, which is cool. Well, I'd say that honestly, when it comes to Moon Knight and the use of Moon Knight, I'm going to give this a 1/4 moon. I really wish that we would see Moon Knight used in a better way within these team groups, recognizing that, every time he's in a team, he says, I don't really work well in a team, that's not how I roll, whatever. And we see that a bit in the Bemis, he doesn't even work well as a team with all of his different personalities.
Tough score.
Yeah, I know, tough score. But I would somewhat agree that as a reader, when I first read this, when I picked this up, I remember reading it all the way through and reading it all the way through another time, and I really enjoyed it. So I would give this a 3/4 moon too, just for the story. I think that Ed Brubaker and, as we mentioned, Mike Deodato Jr.'s shadows were really captivating, especially for that espionage genre. I thought it was really, really fun, and it kept me wanting to read, as you mentioned before, and moving into the second trade and the third trade. So I'd say that, as a Moon Knight lover, as the way that it's used, the way that the trade used Moon Knight and the way that Brubaker used Moon Knight, I'd say 1/4 moon. I wasn't really happy, even with the cool scenes, but he just really wasn't used that well. But as a story as a whole, 3/4 moon, I would absolutely recommend Secret Avengers Mission to Mars, whether you read it in the floppies, issues 1 through 5, or the trade paperback, or as Matthew collected the omnibus, which collects issues 1 through 12.
1 through 12.
I believe.
So it's an omnibus paperback, the one I have. Still paperback, but it's the bigger, collected edition. So I believe I have 1 through 12 of Secret Avengers.
Yeah. So I'd absolutely love that. And if anything else for our Loony listeners, I'd say that in the last couple pages, issue number 5 is a little weird in the sense that it's more of almost like a flashback. It's kind of explaining the
background,
the Shadow
of
Council,
Nick Fury and his involvement in the story.
Yeah, the background of Nick Fury and his involvement. But in the last couple pages, the Shadow Council is looking at the individual members of the Secret Avengers, and if you might notice that the art that was used on the penultimate page, but also the ultimate page of issue 5, of the trade, for Moon Knight is modeled after Bill Sienkiewicz's original art, which I think was really cool. So for new listeners, Bill Sienkiewicz was, for all intents and purposes, basically the original Moon Knight artist. He's the guy that designed the cowl, he designed the mask, he designed the cape, he designed the whole outfit. And those last 2 pages of that issue are almost an homage. I don't know if that's intentional or not. I'd love to talk to the artist about that. But it's essentially an homage to Bill Sienkiewicz's original art of Moon Knight. And the cool thing about that is that it gives this level of mystery. It gives this level of darkness, but also this level of, say, mystery, I guess, just to the character, which, again, piggybacks off of this whole espionage genre, which I have to say, the second volume, I know ITK will get into it one day. Ed Brubaker again, Mike Deodato Jr. again, Eyes of the Dragon. I loved it. But Secret Avengers, Run the Mission, Don't Get Seen, Save the World, these are the 5 or 6 last issues of that run. These are written by Warren Ellis. They're illustrated by McKelvey, Walker, Aha, Lark, Malieve, Immonen. One day we'll get into those. Those are some of the most exciting images of Moon Knight, because that's really bringing Moon Knight into this new decade, which now is the teens, which are almost over. But I'll tell you, Secret Avengers Volume 3, there's some really cool action in that first series with Moon Knight. So I look forward to discussing that with you. So, hey, Moony missives this week. We don't have much Facebook feedback because of the special circumstances. Again, we want to give our best love to host Rey and his partner Eve on the arrival of their child. We do hope that both of you and the sweet baby are well. And Conrd, we hope that you are also doing well as you're traversing the Heliopolis and the Overvoid. Also want to give a big shout out to my buddy Matthew. Matthew, thank you for coming tonight.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and thank you for giving your time. It's always great to talk to a fellow comic lover, but also somebody that is interested in art and interested in story, and also dedicated to their local comic store. So we absolutely are going to give some love to Matthew's local comic store, Brave New Worlds in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. As always, I got to give some love to Tardy's Collector's Corner in Grand Rapids, Michigan. My boy Gavin and his wife Deanna and their buddy Abby always do a really great job. And we thank you for listening to ITK. It's a bit of a long episode tonight, but we do hope that you had a good time. And please note that you can always catch us on all the regular podcast catchers, whether that be on Stitcher or on iTunes. You can also add us on Instagram, Tumblr, YouTube. Just search for Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast, and you can catch us on Twitter at ITK Moon Knight. So, Matthew, may I ask you?
Yes.
Our usual outro. It's down at the bottom of the prompt sheet. Would you be willing to give that to us tonight?
Yes. Prompt me to when I'm supposed to say that.
Right now is fine.
Right now? All right. May Khonshu watch over the denizens of the night.
Good night.
Moon Knight and affiliated characters, stories and events are properties of Marvel Characters Incorporated. Materials used and discussed within the podcast are intended for critique and review purposes only under the fair dealing concept of the current Copyright Act. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the copyright owners.